The items we talk about tonight will come to council on November the 28th. And if there's any more information on any of the ones we talk about tonight, there should be sign-up sheets at the back table there somewhere. Okay, having said that, we'll proceed. Attendance, Councillor Cardy will not be with us tonight. Councillor Obuma will be here very shortly. And Councillor Chambers may be here soon, or we're not sure. Seeking approval of agenda, noting that there is an addendum. Councillor Simons. Seconding, Councillor Pierce. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Declaration of pecuniary interest, if that were to occur. Delegations, petitions, we don't have any. Adoption of minutes from previous meeting. Seeking someone to move that, that's 5A. Moved by Councillor Wheat, second by Councillor Miller. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Number 6, any business arising from those previous minutes? Seeing none. Going on to number 7. These next to the public hearings, we'll be discussing them. The committee will not be voting on them, and then they may come back or they may not. But anyway, 7A, this is the one on 138 Cockshutt Road, ZBA 34-17BH. And this is going to be presented by our senior policy planner, Brendan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The subject lands are located at 138 Cockshutt Road in the geographic township of Brantford. The applicant is proposing to rezone a portion of the subject lands from agricultural to rural residential in order to recognize the existing residential land uses. It is being recommended that this report be received for information purposes. This concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Anyone on the committee, any questions of our planner? Seeing none, we'll turn this part then over to the public meeting part. Anybody in the audience who has a, oh, sorry, we missed you there, Bob. If you can give your name and who you're with.
Rod Van Porten, J.H. Cahoon Engineering Limited. Mr. Chair, members, the purpose of this rezoning application is to allow for the creation of a residential lot at the corner of Cockshutt Road and River Road. Upon this proposed lot is located an existing residential dwelling. This lot was the subject of a previous severance in approximately 2010, which was allowed to lapse. So the existing house is located on the retained parcel, which is a larger parcel of land. Approximately 80% of the proposed lot is zoned residential, rural residential, with the remaining 20% zoned agricultural. On the rural residential lot portion is the septic system and well for the house, and on the agricultural portion is the house. And the purpose of the application is to consolidate these two things into a single housing unit, which would consistently zone the frontage along River Road as rural residential. As noted in the planning staff report, the current split zoning is reflected by the official plan, which in fact designates the 80% as rural residential and the 20% remaining as agricultural. The staff report describes this as an oversight, as the previous official plan designated the entire frontage, including the house, as estate residential, as shown on the overhead screen. We are seeking, in addition to the rezoning, clarification from this council, which has the ability to provide minor modifications to official plan without an official plan amendment. And we believe this is appropriate in this case because of the previous designation, and it would consistently designate and zone all the residential properties on River Road as rural residential. And as I said, this is allowed under the official plan policies. Mr. Chair, members, I can respond to questions.
Anyone on the committee, a question of Mr. Van Portman at this time? Mayor Eddy?
How did it happen that it was deleted?
As I said, in 2010, we did the severances as shown on the overhead now, the 5 lots. The 4 southerly lots, or I guess easterly lots, were created by deed. Lot 1 was not created by deed because of the house being on one portion and the septic system being on another portion of the lot. The official plan designation of 2012 appears to have followed the 2010 severance boundaries, as opposed to also including the house. It was an oversight or something happened that this was missed.
History. Thank you.
Anyone else in the committee, a question, Mr. Van Portman, at this time? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Turning this over to the public part of the meeting, is there anyone in the audience that has a question or comment on this application? Asking a second time and asking a third time. How would the committee like to deal with this particular one? Councillor Simons?
Received for information purposes.
Okay, second by Councillor Pierce. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Switching planners and going to 7B. This is the one on the St. George OPA, St. George area study. So we'll ask our planner, Shika, if she would make comments on this one, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. WSP, on behalf of County of Brant, is proposing an addendum to the St. George area study and an official plan amendment to incorporate those policies, appendices, and schedules. The official plan amendment was initially brought forward to the committee in June of last year for information. The original OPA was more technical in nature and was intended to implement the findings of the area study. A need for addendum report to the adopted St. George area study was identified following further staff discussions. So the details on the official plan amendment and the area study will be explained by Mr. Bobby Gauthier, who's here from WSP. This application, we have circulated it for comments to departments and agencies, and we're seeking that this report be received for information purposes only, and comments from public and committee. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee to our planner at this time? Seeing none, is there any delegation, anybody else involved? Okay, here he is. Thank you. If you give your name and your company.
Sure, of course, Mr. Chair. My name is Bobby Gauthier, and I am with WSP. So, good evening. Thanks for your time tonight. So, a little bit of background. The county retained our firm to assist in facilitating this process of producing the official plan amendment for St. George. And we've been working very closely with county staff since we initiated this process about a couple of years ago. I just wanted to provide a little bit of background information and some of the context about why this official plan amendment was initiated, and just provide a bit of an overview of the different elements of this official plan amendment as proposed and what the OPA is intending to achieve. So a bit of background, I think it's worthwhile to just provide some of the context behind the application and the history behind it. This was really initiated as an outcome of the area study. So in 2014, Council approved the St. George Area Study, which was largely a technical study that examined things like servicing capacity, natural heritage system and means of protecting the environment, transportation improvements. The area study in particular had one outcome and recommendation, and that was that there is a fundamental limit to wastewater servicing capacity in St. George, and this relates to the assimilative capacity of Fairchild Creek. So there is an anticipated limit to the amount of population and growth that can be accommodated in St. George. And so the area study in particular recommended that the official plan be amended to specifically identify what lands would be included in the urban area and would be subject to full municipal services. And that's the first map that you see up on the slide. So the area study recommended that the easterly portion of St. George, so that includes the built-up area, it includes the designated greenfield land around it, that portion of St. George be contained and included within the primary urban settlement area, and those lands would be planned for full municipal services in the long term. The westerly portion of St. George, which in the current official plan is part of the secondary urban settlement area, is currently part of the primary urban settlement area, is proposed to be changed to a secondary urban settlement area. And that's because the wastewater servicing capacity would not be able to address full municipal services for the entire community. So that was the fundamental outcome and recommendation of the area study back in 2014. As Ruchika noted, we brought forward an initial draft of the OPA last year, and that OPA, also as Ruchika noted, was very technical in nature. It was principally intended to implement that specific servicing strategy. So since that OPA was initially presented in a meeting just like this, there have been some staff discussions about the need to elaborate on that document and expand upon it. And I think there's a few reasons for that. The first reason is, I think it's important to note that the area study was largely completed on behalf of 3 landowners that were proposing to develop in St. George at the time. And since the area study was approved, there have been other landowners that have come forward with significant development proposals. And so the number of units and population proposed to be accommodated in St. George has changed quite considerably since the area study was approved in 2014. I think generally the intent of the revised official plan amendment is to ensure that we are considering the county's interests as development and growth proceeds in St. George. The amount of development proposed by the developers in St. George is substantial. It's proposed to greatly increase the population of the community, and there's a need to have very clear policies in place to ensure that development occurs in a fiscally responsible, logical, phased manner. And that's really what this OPA is intending to achieve. So I just wanted to provide a bit of an overview and a summary of the specific elements of the proposed official plan amendment, as well as the area study addendum report. So attached to the council agenda are 2 documents that are being discussed here. The first is the area study addendum report, which provides the narrative and the analysis that goes behind our revised proposed official plan amendment. And the OPA itself is the proposed policies. So in terms of the specific elements that these documents address, the first thing is that we've added some and proposed some principles and objectives up front in the OPA. Things like ensuring development is logical, ensuring that development is contiguous, that St. George grows out in a contiguous, logical fashion, ensuring that infrastructure is in place prior to development approval, ensuring that development contributes to a mix of densities and housing types, ensuring there's an efficient, well-connected and coordinated transportation network, and ensuring that there's good pedestrian connectivity. So the first element of the OPA is just stating those objectives. They're very high-level objectives, but I think it's important to outline what the OPA is trying to achieve, and that's what the first part of the OPA does. The second element of the OPA is a servicing strategy, and I talked about that at length based on the map on the overhead projector. And that was fundamentally the outcome of the area study initially in 2014. And we're proposing to implement that technical recommendation to ensure that the fully serviced portion of St. George is limited to the area that can be serviced based on anticipated wastewater servicing capacity. We've also included some policies to ensure that infrastructure is appropriately financed and paid for by developers, and that the county will be in a good position, a good financial position to operate and maintain that infrastructure. We've added some policies to ensure that servicing is allocated and that servicing is in place before final development approval is given. And that's particularly important considering there will be a limit to wastewater servicing capacity. We added some additional policies to outline a phasing strategy. And I think there actually might be a, yeah, that's the one. So the phasing strategy proposed in the OPA is intended to ensure that development occurs in line with a logical extension of services. So as servicing is extended, that's where development should occur first and then build on that in a contiguous fashion over time. So the map shown on the overhead is a conceptual illustration of how that phasing could occur. And it's attached, I would note, as an appendix to the official plan. So it's not a schedule, it's not really an operative part of the official plan, but it's proposed for reference purposes only. And it supports interpretation of the policies. We've included policies to support a transportation network. That includes a couple of things. So the county has indicated that there's a need to upgrade the road classifications for some of the major streets in St. George. That's to recognize the amount of development that will occur. And there's a conceptual collector road network that's intended to address and illustrate how a coordinated road network could be developed and implemented by developers. So it's important to illustrate what that's going to look like. There's some other principles related to urban design to support the development of an attractive community that's compatible and sensitive to the character of St. George. On the slide is a map showing proposed changes to the natural heritage schedule to implement some of the findings of the area study and identify some improvements to that schedule based on the environmental assessments that were undertaken. And there's also some policies to support creation of an active transportation network in St. George so that developers can work towards achieving a coordinated trail system in the community. And this schedule is attached as an appendix to the OPA, and it illustrates some potential trail opportunities. And then there's a few other matters specifically addressed. I won't go over this in detail, but there's a couple of site-specific policy areas that are carried forward from the original OPA that we proposed about a year and a half ago. And I think that about wraps up my summary of the different elements of the OPA. So I think in conclusion, what I wanted to note is that, fundamentally this OPA is about implementing the area study as approved in 2014, but it's also about setting out a policy framework to ensure that development will be responsible, to ensure that it will be contiguous, logical, and coordinated with a servicing strategy. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, Councilor Miller?
Thank you. Mr. Chair. Through you to the presenter. I want to say to you and Rashika, thank you for writing it in English, because it was easy to understand. It made a lot of sense. Two quick questions. One is, you talk about infilling and keeping capacity wastewater for infilling. Do you set aside a certain percentage or a certain amount for that, and how much would that be?
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. One of the proposed policies that we've included in the OPA is that a certain percentage of servicing capacity will be made for infill development. We've not explicitly outlined what that percentage is in the policy, but it's something that would, I think, be addressed in more detail as part of the county's servicing allocation policy. So it is something that's been contemplated.
Okay. Yeah, no, I didn't read it, and that's why I'm asking. Thank you. Second question. We're receiving this tonight. The public can have input, and then it goes out for comment. And when it comes back, do you guys have a timeline on that? And would you also be waiting on the EAs as well, I'm assuming, for the water and wastewater before we see before we actually comes to a vote?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I can answer that. The Class EA is getting nearly completion. We have our PIC already scheduled, November 21st. And the details on what the simulative capacity of Fairchilds Creek is pretty close to what is acceptable by MOE. Based on that, I think we'll work on our policies, whether it is allocation or phasing and things like that. So we'll work on based on what the final number MOECC is okay with, and we are not going to wait for the Class EA. We want to wait for the Class EA to be completed, but if there are any orders, this whole proposal is also related to the Empire appeals that are being scheduled in April of next year. So we want the official plan amendment exercise to be completed prior to the board hearing.
Anyone else on the committee, a question of the delegation? Okay, Mayor Reddy?
Yes, well, I have some concern. It seems odd to me that we are now facing this tonight. Within a few days, we will be meeting in St. George and meeting the citizens of St. George regarding this whole matter. Maybe it's only the document, the addendum report that we've got, and that'll be clarified, but it looks to me like we're guaranteeing services for some of the land to be developed and guaranteeing there won't be services for other lands that will be developed. And we've had a lot of discussion recently about servicing and non-servicing. But it seems to me that we're now rushing ahead to do this at the last minute. And I really don't understand why we haven't dealt with this previously, why we're doing now. Maybe your study was just completed. Is that the story? Or see what you say. But for that mass of land to the west of the village of St. George that will not be developed on full services, I suspect maybe water services, but not sewers. At this time, it will not be developed. It'll be developed, but without proper sewer services. And we do have various kinds of sewer services in the county of Brant. I see it as a problem, rushing, as I feel, with this tonight. Now, the land, a question I would have is, the land that will be developed without full services will be developed anyway because it's been designated for growth. Is that correct? That massive area is designated for growth. And so we can develop it partially. But we've had this discussion just recently on other areas that we don't want, that perhaps we do not want to develop on partial services. And I'm finding it confusing that we're doing this now. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I can try and answer some of the elements. The area study that was adopted by Council in 2014 did recommend this approach of having one area of St. George with full services and the other area with partial services because of the simulative capacity of Fairchilds Creek. And the area study also recommended doing an official plan amendment, which we started last year. But because after we initiated the official plan amendment last year, there were discussions with the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, and they had some concerns with respect to the simulative capacity. So between last year and now, those concerns have been we have gone back and forth with the consultants who are doing the Class CA and the ministry, and they have they provided draft comments on the simulative capacity, and based on that, we basically brought this report forward. So we were not sitting and waiting for, we were actually waiting for MOE's comments so that we are comfortable enough to remodel this official plan amendment exercise and bring it back again. I'm not sure if there's any more questions on, did I answer everything?
Yes. We're told about the present industrial subdivisions west of St. George in the township, that they were absolutely the wrong place, although they were approved by a planning authority and a council. Now we're doing exactly the same thing again. Does this include the possibility of heavy industry of various kinds in the blue area that's sketched out here? Is it a mixture?
So through you, Mr. Chairman, there is a separate exercise of the employment needs analysis that is ongoing, and that will detail whether this is appropriate site or not. That is done through municipal comprehensive review. In this particular exercise, we are only saying that these industrial lands, they are designated for industrial, but the proposed site-specific policy area will only allow for dry kind of industrial uses that do not use too much water, because these uses will be on septic systems. So that will limit a lot of industrial users. And that's, again, this exercise is not to deal with whether the industrial area is at the right location or not. That is another separate study that is ongoing.
Anyone else in the committee, a question of the delegate? Councilor Wheat?
Yeah, I actually don't have a question. I just have a comment, Mr. Deladay. I think this is a very thorough document that you prepared. It really protects the municipality and the county as a whole moving forward, because there's going to be immense pressure from the developers, because as you know, there's more than three. There was three 2 years ago, but there's 5 of them now. I stand corrected for 6, but I'm thinking 5. And I think this is a terrific document. I don't feel that it was rushed, although the mayor disagrees. But I don't feel it was rushed, and I looked through this on the weekend, and I think it's very, very thorough. And I think you're patted on the back for the job that you've done.
Thank you very much.
You've really protected the municipality.
Thank you.
Anyone else on the committee with a
protecting
question
at
at this
all.
time?
It's not protecting.
Okay, seeing none, we'll turn it over to the public part of the meeting. Is there anyone in the audience that has a question or comment at this time? Okay, well, I'll take a seat for a second. If you can give your name and address.
Yes, my name
please.
is Nora Futon, 501 Blue Lake Road, St. George. I would like to compliment, just as John Wheat did, the report. That was very thorough and well presented and clear. You've obviously done a lot of work. I'm just commenting from the point of view of an average citizen who doesn't know too much about what's going on here. That's a very pretty map up there. You can't read anything. And so I'm just wondering if there is a possibility for us people who don't want to go on the website to have printed documents explaining what the acronyms are and what the different colors are. It would be nice to be able to have a chance to sit at home and study this and make a decision on that basis. Now, I do happen to know the geography pretty well, so after a while I finally figured out what I was looking at. But it would have been nice to have a larger piece of paper that I could actually see. My other question is, has to do with the wastewater from this unserviced area or partly serviced areas. I'm wondering what kind of solution there might be. Are we just looking at plain old-fashioned septic systems, or is there something else in the works? Nobody knows?
Okay.
Those questions will be answered. There could be more answers from the audience this year. Our planner will come back up when they're all questions are in.
Okay, I'd just like to make a note of the fact that that is an issue for me, and I am aware that there are many more modern ways of disposing of wastewater, and I'm hoping that the committee has taken a good look at all the European solutions, for instance. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience has a question or comment? Yes, sir, if you would come up, please.
Thank you. Thank you. You're right.
Give your name and address, sir.
Nick Ugulius, 3800 Steeles Avenue West in Vaughan. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm from Nadiva Properties, and we're a land development and property management company, and we recently acquired the Oaks of St. George Golf Course. That is the green blob at the southwest portion of this map on the overhead. I was only made aware of this planning advisory committee meeting last minute, and while I've had several meetings now with staff, I'd like to reiterate our commitment to participate in the county's OPA process, as we do not want to be overlooked as a key stakeholder moving forward. A little bit of background on the property itself. It's approximately 140 acres. It currently falls within the primary urban settlement area of St. George, and it's further within the built boundary of St. George, making it a prime candidate for infilling or intensification. The site is designated as primarily as parks and recreation as a result of the historic use of the property as a golf course, as well as it has some limited suburban residential and natural heritage system as well. As you can see from the map on the overhead, the lands to the east, south, and west are either existing residential or planned for future residential, with the lands directly to the north being designated for future employment uses. We have reviewed the attached report before you tonight, and we look forward to providing our formal comments, as there are significant recommendations being made that will have an impact on the future use of our lands. And while our short-term vision for the property is to continue having it used and operate as a golf course, our longer-term vision is to develop the property for a residential community offering a natural setting of open space, rivers, parks, and trails that become incorporated into the public domain for use for the general public that exists now as well as the future of St. George. In addition, we have submitted a detailed letter to the planning department proposing a site-specific policy area for the subject lands that allows redevelopment on partial services and in turn would not compete for sanitary allocation with other developers within St. George. In this regard, we do look forward to working with staff to realize a joint vision for this property, as we strongly believe that it can create a community that will meet and exceed the objectives of the county's official plan by firstly facilitating the county target for residential development to be within the built boundary, allowing the county to provide for a greater range and mix of housing types and densities, creating a well-connected trail network, not only for active transportation, but for passive recreation, education, and nature appreciation that is integrated into a comprehensive trail network for the community at large. In addition, ensuring that development is attractive and compatible with the existing community, which in our case is primarily lower density forms of housing. And lastly, incorporating an environmentally sustainable development strategy that includes low-impact development, or LIDs, as well as a superior private sanitary system using biofilter technology that is financially responsible for the county. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to working with staff, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Anyone on the committee a question at this time? Councillor Gatwer?
Can't do that.
He's here to give information, not to deal with questions from staff.
From committee?
Mr. Chair, I just wondered if you had a copy of his presentation for you and Rashika, that's all.
Well, that's the previous one. That's the previous speaker.
Absolutely, I'm happy to provide Rashika with a copy of my presentation.
Oh,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience have a question or comment regarding this particular matter? Seeing none at this time, asking a second time and a third time. Now, can our delegate answer the first two questions, or would our staff need to do that?
Sure. So the first question was in regards to whether the materials could be printed. I think that should be fine. I'm sure staff would be happy to coordinate that.
Okay.
I'm seeing Rashika nod, so I assume so. The second question was in regards to, I think, future servicing for the employment lands. And at this time, at least, what's being planned for is that those lands would be on septic systems and provided with municipal water services.
She made reference to there's some European methods or technology that might be appropriate to the site, or?
I don't think we've looked at that specifically, but it's something we can take away and reflect on, certainly.
Okay. Now, the second gentleman, I don't know if Rashika, he's being accommodated at the staff level, and this is just a preliminary, the fellow who bought the golf course.
this is massive to put on septic tanks.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we have received a preliminary proposal, which we still need to review.
Okay. Councillor Simon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the presenter, thank you for your presentation. It was very thorough and very good. Will we be introducing LITs, which is long, low-impact development, into this community? I think it would serve well if we did, and I'm hoping we do.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair. Certainly something we can consider. We haven't introduced any specific policies to describe or reflect on low-impact development, but certainly that's something that could be encouraged, and we can take that away and consider how we can address that in the OPA.
How would committee like to deal with this proposal? Okay, Councillor Miller?
I'll move to receive.
Okay. Seconder, Councillor Coleman. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
There's a hell of a big piece of land to develop on septic tanks. That is unbelievable. That's not the way.
I can't believe we made the reason another golf course.
Yes, yes, sir.
We're moving on to 8A, a public hearing under the Planning Act to consider staff recommendations. These are zoning housekeeping, and we'll ask our planner at this time, our zoning bylaw administrator rather, if she has any comments at this time, or?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Planning staff has undertaken a further housekeeping amendment with regard to the recently approved County of Brant zoning bylaw 6116. This application proposes to correct general text and mapping errors throughout the document, as well as modify definitions outlined within the attached chart and draft bylaw. The proposed amendments and updates are consistent and in keeping with the County of Brant official plan. Notices were placed in the local newspapers regarding the proposed housekeeping amendments. Staff is requesting approval of this application and proposed amendments as outlined within the draft bylaw attached. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Anyone on the committee, any questions of our administrator? Councillor Simons?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jessica, will this be including the land on Paris Road? 513 Paris Road, I believe, where the GPS is not correct in the mapping of it, of the ownership? Or am I off topic?
Sorry, I'm just looking here.
You recall we talked about the GPS showing how the green lines move very close to the house at 513, and it wasn't that at all. It was not correct. So has that been changed?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is something completely separate with regards to the GIS information. So that'll be addressed later on throughout technical review with GIS.
So I've got GIS and GPS confused. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
First bullet point has to do with general mapping and text amendments relating to errors as determined on an ongoing basis. There seem to be a number of these. We've had bylaws like this before on an ongoing basis. Are there a lot of errors?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So for zoning bylaws, we intend for this to become a living document. So in the past, it hasn't been updated perhaps as much as it should have been on an ongoing basis. With 6116, we're taking a different approach. So we intend for it to be more of a living document, meaning that when errors are identified by staff or by the public throughout consultation with proposals coming forward, we take a look at that and we include it in an upcoming housekeeping to do it a little more often so that the document is more up to date and more correct on an ongoing basis versus leaving things too long, having too many amendments and risking things kind of falling through the cracks.
Thank you. In the fourth bullet point, amend a site-specific area within Paris and St. George to re-establish commercial uses which were previously permitted. So they were permitted and not permitted, and now we want to permit them again. I can't understand why that would be happening.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So this was identified through working within these specific areas. There was a split zoning, as you can see, within this area identified in Paris. This is the 11001 zoning bylaw, so our previous zoning bylaw to this particular one. So there was a split zoning category, R3 and RO it would have been residential third density and residential office. Within those specific categories, there were actually areas which allowed for further permitted uses, which related to other zone categories. Through the zoning bylaw review, we identified what those specific properties were intended to be within our official plan. However, some of the other uses, which were more sort of neighborhood commercial uses in nature, things like a personal service establishment or a limited dry cleaning establishment, things of that nature that would directly service the neighborhood, were kind of lost. So we're just reinstating those. We caught them quite quickly, considering, so we're reinstating those for property owners so that they still have access to those permitted uses.
Well, certainly we need commercial space, there's no doubt about that, so thank you for the information.
Anyone else on the committee a question at this time? At this time, we'll end this part and go to the public part. Is there anybody in the audience has a question or comment about the zoning bylaw changes? Asking a second time? Asking a third time? Seeing none. How would the committee like to deal with this, Councillor Pierce?
So moved.
Okay. We need a seconder. Okay, Councillor Miller, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, we're moving on to 8B. This is the Ken Ritchie, 309 Cockshed Road, and we'll ask our planner to present this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The property is located at 309 Cockshed Road between Myers-Koff Road and Campbell Farm Road outside of the Birch settlement area. The applicant is currently constructing a single detached residential dwelling on the property and is requesting relief from the zoning bylaw to permit a larger accessory structure than what is permitted. The proposal is to rezone the subject lands from agricultural A to special exception agricultural to permit a total area of 352 square meters for all accessory structures, whereas a gross floor area of 75% of the dwelling would be permitted, up to a maximum of 292.5 square meters. The proposed accessory structures will include a 320 square meter storage building with a height of 8.5 meters for a personal use, and the remaining 32 square meters will be available for future construction of a deck. The request for additional height is to ensure adequate clearance for the indoor storage of a motorhome. The property is located on a 5.5 acre parcel with significant buffering between neighboring properties. Therefore, the size and the height of the structure will have no impact on the surrounding neighborhood. The lands are currently designated agricultural in the County of Brant official plan. No concerns were raised through circulation of this application. It's planning staff's opinion that the proposed rezoning is consistent with provincial policies and the County of Brant official plan. Planning staff are recommending approval of the rezoning application. This concludes my comments. Thank you.
Anyone on the committee a question of our planner at this time? Seeing none, is the delegation for this one here?
He is here.
We'll turn this over to the public then at this time. Anybody in the congregation or group have any question or comment at this time? Asking a second time? Asking a third time? How would the committee like to deal with this one? Councillor Coleman? Okay. Counselor by Counselor Buma. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Just mention before we go to the next one, the mayor mentioned about the, when we're talking about St. George, there is a public meeting, I think 4:30 to 7:30 on November 21st. I might not, that's the right date. So the public is welcome to go and get more information regarding St. George. So, yeah. Okay, on to number C. This is the Bradley Hunter, 188 Golf Links Road, and we'll ask our planner to present this one as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The subject lands are located at 188 Golf Links Road, just south of the 403, between Middletown Line Road and East Quarter Town Line Road, in the former township of Burford. The applicant has received provisional approval for to sever a surplus farm dwelling with an area of approximately 0.6 hectares. This application proposes to rezone the retained farmland from agricultural to agricultural special provision A9 to prohibit a dwelling as a permitted use. It's being recommended that this application be approved. This concludes my comments. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee on this particular one? Councillor Buma?
Yeah, if I may, through you, Mr. Chair, just of the staff, just wondering, Dan, if you know when the other severance was done off of this property? Offhand?
Now, unfortunately, wasn't able to find anything in the property.
So it's a long time
file.
ago?
Yeah, so.
That's all I needed to know. Thank you very much.
Anyone else a question of our planner at this time? Okay, is there the delegation for this one, or? Okay, turn it over to the public then at this time. Anybody in the audience that has a question or comment at this time? Asking a second time and a third time. How would the committee like to deal with this particular one? Councillor Weed?
Move the recommendation.
Councillor Buma?
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, moving on down to number 9, consent items. There's an A part and a B part. Looking for 9A, someone to approve. Councillor Coleman, seconded. Councillor Pierce. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Number B, to be received. Needing a motion on that. Councillor Pierce. Councillor Gatward. Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. We're down to number 10. These are the committee reports. That's on your addendum. There's the Brand Heritage Committee report, and then there's the Brand Heritage Committee report, and then there's a third one. You need somebody to...
Yeah, there's just the 2 recommendations from the committee. If you flip the page over,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Any comments from the committee on these 2, Councillor Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, the proposal for the plaque at the Paris Cenotaph, I think that's a great idea to show the sacrifices from World War I and II, but I would hope that the same opportunity would be given to other legions within the county. We have several. So my question, I guess, would be, will the Heritage Committee be looking at that as well? Thank you.
I would suggest bring that question to the next Heritage Committee, which will be the first Thursday in December.
Thank you. Counselor Pierce, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, if I could, I would just, from the Brant Heritage, or the Heritage Minutes there on November 2nd, I'd just like to draw everybody's attention to the Bucket Center Old Town Hall update there, where it says on November 20th, we're actually having the presentation of the plaque on the building. So I just wanted to just reiterate that if anybody didn't see that, that is happening on the 20th of November at 1 p.m. Everybody's invited.
All right, thank you.
No food.
Any other, Counselor Boomer?
Just curious if I could, through you, Mr. Chair, on item 2 from the Heritage Committee, I know that requests, if an older house is coming down, if a new house is being built, individually, that's already done. So is there not already something in place for a developer if they're going to be taking down an old building for the Heritage Committee to go in there? Is that why this request is before us, or is that new, or was that like that already before? Is that already covered off by other things?
Counselor Weed has an answer.
It's new and it's new and it's old.
Okay.
But when buildings are coming down, we'd like to be able to record the history of that building, and once it's torn down, you can't. It's gone, it's gone. And we realize that it's going to go, but we'd like to get some pictures of it so that we can record it. We're not trying to save the building or keep it up. We just wanted to be able to record the historical value of it. It's a simple little request.
No, and I agree, but I just thought that was already in place. That's not yet the case, that?
It is and it isn't.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Sure.
Now it is.
Now it is in place.
No longer isn't.
Depends on the day.
Thank you.
I guess he needs to put that in writing. Anyway.
It is in writing.
Okay.
Now in writing, and we're going to do it.
Any other comments, questions on these two recommendations? Okay, we need someone to move these two. Counselor Pierce, second by Counselor Wheat. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. So that's item 10. Item 11 is staff reports regarding the pit on Bishopgate Road. Now, Rashika, I think, is going to comment on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This staff report is seeking recommendation from the committee with respect to the Ontario Municipal Board hearing for Alzoka Pit. And any questions I can answer.
Any questions of Rashika on Councilor Coleman?
Well, that's fine and dandy. I mean, that's what the planning and council's decision. Is there a lawyer or a solicitor going to be hired to defend the staff's position? The staff's position was totally different from the council's position, so how does that work?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's how the recommendation is worded, that the solicitor is going to hire a planning consultant to defend the planning committee's and council's position because staff's position was different. That's correct.
Anyone else? Councilor Gower?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have any idea when this may be scheduled for?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, no, we have not received any dates yet from the board.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we need a vote on needing someone to move the revised recommendation.
I don't think so. Excuse me. Oh, my goodness. I'll move it.
Moved by Councilor Simons,
Yes.
seconded by Councilor Coleman. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. So it's 11A. Down to 11B, staff report, site plan control application. Okay, but we still vote on the...
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just for business consideration.
Gotta start. This is a good process. Start somewhere.
Our planner is going to present on this particular item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The subject lands are located at 142 Dundas Street East in the geographic town of Paris. The total area of the subject lands is approximately 3,723 meters squared. The site is serviced by municipal water. From a traffic count perspective, this is at the busiest intersection in the county. Presently, the subject lands are vacant, having been previously occupied by a used car dealership that was demolished. The applicant is seeking approval in principle of the site plan application for a proposed automotive service shop. Staff is confident that all of the major aspects of the site design have been addressed, including landscaping, traffic impact, and stormwater management. However, staff is of the opinion that the proposed building elevations are not appropriate for a commercial building at such a prominent commercial intersection. The building style being proposed would be much better suited in an industrial park setting, and staff is concerned that the building will be setting the bar for future commercial buildings in the county going forward. Staff is requesting the application be bumped up for committee's consideration and is recommending refusal of the site plan until such time that the applicant submits improved building elevations which are more conducive to a commercial development. This concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Anyone questions of our planner at this time? That's the one on the corner, kitty corner from Tim Hortons. Councillor Simons?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Ryan, I commend you for doing this. This is something that I've really wanted for a long time. It is the gateway to our community, and maybe it will be the showcase feature for that corner. It is important that we start dressing our buildings and having them a little bit more significant than what we have been. So I commend you for that. Thank you. And I'd like to bump up the site plan also.
Councillor Broom?
If we approve the recommendation to refuse and a different or a revised site plan comes in, do we have to go through the whole reconsideration motion, or is it just considered a different site plan? Or does it need a whole new site plan then, or what's the process? Thank you.
Thanks. Through you, Mr. Chair, staff was looking essentially for direction from the committee in their estimation as to whether this would be an acceptable building elevation. If the committee were to refuse the application in principle at this time, I don't believe it would require a new site plan application. What we would ideally ask for is for the applicant, at the direction of the committee, to come back with improved elevations based on the feedback that's been provided by staff as well as our peer review service. And at which time staff would probably bring back a similar report as you'd see now, while recommending approval at such time that we did see something.
Anyone else? Councillor Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Ryan. Just to be clear, the applicant has met all the other conditions of the site plan except for the elevation. In the package that we got, is this the on page 225 of our package? Is that the proposed? Is there any way we could see that on the overhead screen? What's proposed? Like I seen what's that company, Urban, suggested in our addendum, which I mean, I'll admit it's a nice looking building, but is that what's proposed right now in the current site plan?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think I can illustrate this a bit better if we will. These are actually slides that Rob had brought forward for an urban design session previously in September, I believe, and this is sort of the progression of the building as we've seen it since June. The site plan was submitted in June. This is the initial iteration of the building, if you will. Through consultation with the owner, we had some improvements done to the building. This would be the second submission. This is sort of there's some additional features added, but it wasn't very significant in our opinion. And this is ultimately the most recent iteration of the building that we've seen. There has been some improvements to the facade in the way of some additional brick on the bottom of the building and some improvements to the main entranceway features. But this here is what you see is what the most recent submission of the elevations that we had. And at that point, we felt we weren't getting too far with the applicant, and it was in our opinion that this would just be best to be bumped up to the committee for their consideration.
Follow-up question then. Because it is where it is on that corner, I don't know what side would be facing the street. Like if I was coming out of Horton, like looking from Hortons, what would I be looking at? I have no idea.
The top part.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the northerly elevation would be here facing Dundas Street. And then I believe your, I gotta get this straight, your easterly elevation, which would be sort of facing the curve of the intersection of Dundas and Paris Road more, would be the overhead door here. I guess I could, sorry to elaborate, the rear of the building would be facing the motel to the south.
Yes.
To the west would be...
So that view there in the middle, you'd see that from Paris Road then?
No, my apologies. That would be facing the south directly backing into the hotel property. You wouldn't be seeing this specifically from a perpendicular view from the street. That elevation would be here.
Councillor Goward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I understand that we want our gateways to look nice. However, I'm wondering what the difference in costs between steel siding and brick is. Perhaps the owner can't afford a brick building. And I guess I'm also wondering if it's an automotive repair or improvements to cars, detailing, I don't know what else, they do everything to cars these days. Perhaps the owner doesn't want the windows that were shown in the example. Perhaps he's concerned that that may make it easier, for instance, for someone to break into his facility because there's lots of valuable tools inside. So do we consider all the items? And I'm wondering, my last thing is, have you talked to the owner about your suggestion picture or Lanka to see if they're willing to change this? Going on Councillor Booma's question about, you know, like, could we defer this and see if they could come back with a more suitable plan that you could accept?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and please interrupt me if I've missed one of your questions. So, first and foremost, the building facade treatment or the material that we're looking at of a metal clad building such as this is certainly not conducive to a commercial corridor intersection that we are dealing with in this instance, and that's the opinion of staff as well as the opinion of our peer review service at Urban Strategies. That being said, it has been indicated by the owner that, again, in terms of the cost burden of developing a brick building at the intersection would certainly put them in a difficult scenario, and I'd imagine that they will be elaborating on that in their presentation. However, in the instance of development in a major intersection like this, our opportunity for a proper commercial building and proper commercial facade treatments only comes up how many times? Once every 30, 40, 50 years. And in this instance, there's only 4 intersecting properties. In order for us to be able to establish a good commercial corridor and a good gateway to that commercial corridor, I don't think that planning staff should be put in a position to be having to accept more industrial buildings, and which is why we brought it to the committee for their consideration. We have made the stance that we're not in a position to approve this building here for your point as to whether we can go back to the applicant, that's staff's preference, is for the committee to refuse the proposed building facade, have the applicant come back with an improved building facade, and for us to have something that we can, support at this intersection. And again, Councillor Gatward, I apologize if I missed one of your questions, but I think that was it.
I'm sorry, could you say that last sentence again?
If I had missed one of your questions there, I think it was specifically about, my apologies, about the glass. Again, there is a material that's known as spandrel. It's a false fronting glass. It's used in all kinds of commercial buildings, and it doesn't actually provide entryway into a building. It's opaque. It's not clear, but it gives a visually appealing look of glass. You see this very often in commercial corridors and industrial corridors, even throughout the GTA, and it can be false fronting onto any different materials that you wouldn't want visible, either for security purposes or just for aesthetic purposes. So in terms of having genuine see-through window glass, that's understandable. It wouldn't be necessarily be desirable to have that on the facade of a building where you have valuable assets inside of the building. But there's other options to improve the facade of a commercial building at a major commercial corridor that doesn't necessarily pose a security risk.
Okay, and did you say whether you discussed it with the applicant and the,
Yeah, we had at previous meetings, September 1st, I believe, was our last meeting with the applicant as to some of the options that we can look at. My understanding through the applicant and his consultant is that it creates too much of a financial burden for them, and that this is what they have, and this is sort of the most recent or the best elevation that they can provide us at this time.
so they don't want to change it? Is that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I will let the applicant or his agent speak to that as to what their stance is, but this is ours at this time, and I believe they do have a presentation available if you were interested to hear that.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the committee, a question of our planner? Would it be fair to use the word "it's not compatible with the surrounding area" in terms of the, as you say, the design, the texture, et cetera, is that?
Mr. Chair, to the word compatible, I'm not certain that that would be applicable to this instance. The use is certainly compatible. It's commercial use. It's permitted and endorsed under our official plan and zoning bylaw. It certainly is a compatible use. But the word that we look at a lot in planning and in urban design, and as well as our urban design consultants when we do consult with them, is character and sort of the character of the building, and whether that is compatible with the surrounding land uses. It's been raised that the building is certainly better than what surrounds it, and I would commend that, and I would admit that of course it's an improvement. However, there has to be a point at which we need to set the bar and establish good urban design principles in the county, especially at major intersections such as this. So it certainly is compatible. However, the character and then the design standards that we like to meet at the county, that's another story.
Anyone else in the committee? How would the committee like to deal with this, knowing that the recommendation is refusal? All in, or?
I'll move the recommendation.
Okay.
Second.
Second of Councilor Bruma. All in favor? No, it's not a public, is it? No, it's a staff report.
Mr. Chair, if I may, the applicant as president, I think, has a presentation prepared for us. Is that permitted?
It's up to the committee, but that's not our.
It's not really,
Okay, the explanation from our clerk is it's staff report, it's not part of the process. If you wish the gentleman to come and speak, the committee will have to vote whether they wish him to do so or not. Councilor Coleman?
I'll move that they can make the presentation.
I'll second that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Okay, the gentleman is allowed to come to the front, sir, and give your name and address, and
Now, we do have a slide presentation. I'm not sure how to operate this. There you go, sir. Thanks. Set it up for you. Most of it is summed up in this, which I'll circulate.
okay.
Thank you. No problem. I'll put that aside. Thank you.
Doesn't matter, PDF
Yeah,
or the...
yeah, I think it's PDF. Yep. And then can kind of zip along from there.
full screen. Nice. Come on. Oh, at least slideshow.
Yeah, there we go. My name is Nelson Amaral. I'm counsel to Mr. Shimkoviak and his company, who will now currently own the property anyways. We have two representatives of Lanka, who are the builders, and Bob Phillips, who's the engineer, who may want to also add something to this. I will note that the application was submitted some time ago, and the initial plans were provided in April of this year. My client informs me there is no issue, or he was told there was no issue with the elevations until this past September. Now, the building's been delayed to some extent, and this has created some problem for us. I will note that the Urban Strategies, Inc. memo that was provided to council was only provided to me some 27 hours ago. That does concern me from a legal standpoint. However, that is something that may be addressed at a later date. I do note within the Urban Strategies plan, if you have it, it's this here, there are some concerns that I think jump out at me, at least. Now, I note that most of the criticisms tend to be aesthetic in nature, not so much with when you look at the surrounding buildings, when you look at the structure and the use of the proposed building. It's primarily the aesthetic problem is what is been made to be a large issue here, most of which I think is subject to interpretation to a large extent. It's an eye of the beholder issue. When you have to consider the central facade of the building and the use in the designated areas, here I'll kind of zip to it. If you're looking at it now, you're looking at generally the overview of the property, and you'll see where the prior existing building was, which was torn down. And if we move along here, here's some of the existing that did not comply with the standards and codes. However, yeah, we'll zip through. This is the old building that was torn down. And over to some of the surrounding properties. I think this is, yeah, a few pictures of the neighborhood. This is a good example of the buildings that are in the area. Although Mr. Cummins stated that we need to raise the bar at some point, I would suggest that the building being proposed actually does raise the bar to a large extent and is in keeping with a lot of the standards. You know, we'd hate to have this degenerate into a subjective overview of aesthetics as it stands, but that's what it seems to have come to. I'll note that one thing I found somewhat troubling is the picture provided of Miller Auto Care on page 3 of the Urban Strategies report. That's actually located in Carmel, Indiana, in an area that's C2 zone, which is, of course, mixed residential and industrial. And the interesting thing about it when I looked into this is the city of Carmel actually specifies to use brick and to use design features that would be incorporated or consistent with surrounding buildings. Now, if we take that same kind of reasoning and apply it to this situation, I would suggest that my client's building, in fact, does meet those types of standards and is in a very different area and zoned for a very different purpose. Now, you know, some of the other issues that they brought out in this, including the enhanced landscaping treatments, all of that, you know, to a large extent can be incorporated. The issue with surface parking treatment and the idea that managing stormwater may be an issue. My background is in condominium development, and that's where I spent a formidable part of my practice. Most of that's dealt with, I found, in either stormwater drainage plans or the drainage plan itself. Now, the central concern we do have is comparing this accurately, and it's more of an apples to oranges issue as we see it today. And that is the central concern. My client is willing to be reasonable and work with council, but these changes, at least the initial suggested ones, impact the bottom line dramatically. And we're not talking about an additional 5 or 10 or 15 or 30 or 40,000, but higher. We're north of that. And that is one of the central concerns. My client does want to do business in the area, has purchased the property, and has acted in good faith throughout. I think for the most part, you have to look at this as to whether or not we want to encourage development in a way that's consistent. And I understand you have a mandate with respect to that. But I think it would improve that neighborhood and that corner dramatically, even consistent with the elevations that have been submitted as far as the revisions go. However, I will invite either Representative Blanco or the engineer to speak to some additional issues that they've noticed throughout, if you want to. No. And Representative Lanka, perhaps? If you have any issues. We did note that by delaying this project to this extent, it has increased the cost of building, because now we're looking at over the winter, if approved at all. Now, this is, of course, in the hands of the committee. However, we do believe that it's probably in the best interest of all parties in order to move this matter forward. What's being suggested is not incompatible with what the mandate and the bylaws. And I think that's the central concern. When we first looked into providing these elevations and getting them done and drafted, that was taken into account. We looked at what is required, and I think they met that. They've gone back and forth with planning, and we've come to a second set of elevations that I think incorporate a lot of the aesthetic issues, but we don't want to be drawn into a debate as to whether or not this is more pleasing or less pleasing, because that leads itself to open to interpretation and abuse in so many ways, and that's our central concern. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee?
We haven't approved the second.
Okay, we'll ask our planner, Mr. Trotter, to come to the podium, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make one comment with respect to the delegation that you just heard. He indicated that the plans have been submitted since April. You can read from Ryan's report that the complete site plan application came in on June the 2nd. So while they may have been having discussions with the owner and applicant and consultants for quite some time, the county received the application on June the 2nd.
Any other questions, comments from committee? Councillor Simons?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is to Ryan. There was comment about the presenter receiving the urban strategies 27 hours ago. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. The county staff also received the summary from Urban Strategies yesterday as well, and that was forwarded out to members of the committee at the exact same time, as well as the owner and his representatives.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Now, we've had a, Councilor Coleman?
There has been a motion made to accept this one, am I right?
Yes.
So I will not support that motion. Proposed building looks much better than what's already sitting on that site. And I have some concerns on, worry about the gateway. I look at, there's a former restaurant there on, what's it called, number 2 coming in Paris that was a disgrace. And nothing ever seems to happen about that. And I like to chip wagon across the road, so I'm supporting not supporting the recommendation. And I think it needs a building on there. And I commend people for wanting to take an investment in it. And when we start dictating how we want things to look and whatnot, and dictate to the building community, I have a big problem with that.
Councilor Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I concur with Councilor Coleman there. I think we need to, I totally understand what staff is trying to do here, and I appreciate that. As you say, it is the gateway into the town. But again, if you look at the surroundings of what is there, we've got somebody that wants to come into our community with a business, and again, what they're proposing is, I would say 100 times better than what was there. So kudos to them for ripping it down and starting net new. What I would like to see is some sort of, if we can hear some sort of compromise between what staff is looking for and what the proponent is willing to do here. But again, I can't support refusal of this. Again, there's been a couple drafts. They've done some changes to it. That in mind, I do appreciate where staff is going here, but I'm not sure this is the place to start that. Thank you.
Anyone else? We've had a mover and a seconder. Voting on the issue then, or sorry, Councilor Miller?
Just, I'm going to reiterate what was already said. Kudos to staff for bringing this to our attention. I really struggle with this because I think, Ryan, you made a great argument, but at the end of the day, we have a business owner willing to invest in the community, and beauty really is in the eye of the beholder, so I can see some people thinking the building proposed is actually not too bad, so I won't support the recommendation, but no offense to staff.
Councilor Chambers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my apologies for being late. I didn't catch the start of the application or the beginning of the presentation of the staff report, but I feel that I can take part in the discussion and the vote. I have a question in terms of process and procedure. If this site plan application is refused, what is the next step? What happens then? Do they go back to the drawing board, or do they, I'm not clear as to what would happen if this is refused, as opposed to it, the recommendation being defeated. Perhaps staff can help me out.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we would ask that the applicant, if the motion was, if the application was refused, we on behalf of the committee would ask for the applicant to take that back and improve the building facade proposal to the point where staff was comfortable with it or was in a position to support the application, and then we would come back again for the consideration of the committee with those improvements.
If I could just continue before I'm interrupted by my colleague at the end of the table. In terms, I guess, of a supplementary, if the committee is seeking a middle ground or a compromise, as Councillor Pierce suggested, is that in the works, or do we indicate that we're firm with our position, and if they don't meet what we say, they're going to be refused again, kind of thing? Is there an avenue for compromise, I guess is what I'm saying, without either refusing the application or approving it? somewhere in between? What's the mechanism for that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, as it was clearly stated in the staff report, staff's not in a position to support on our own merit the proposed building elevations. With that being said, if you were to seek a middle ground, and please let me know if I'm offside with this, but I would suggest that deferral would be your only opportunity for that, for them to bring back a new elevation, say in a month's time, without staff input, and for the committee to consider that at that point.
Councillor Coward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I look at the site plan, I'm through you to the planner. The corner, is that a grassed area? And are those trees along the property line or bushes?
Through you, Mr. Chair, along the property line, which would be between the road allowance and then the interior parking area, you see landscaping features and planters, if you will, at the entrances. And then the circles that you might be looking at there, those would be proposed red maples. At the corners and in between the planters and then proposed trees, those would be curbed landscape open space in the form of grass. That's correct, yeah.
And where the red maples are, is there grass between there and the building at the corner? Because the parking seems to be in the back of the arch.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. So there's a strip of grass between the boulevard and the parking areas. Interior to the site is entirely a parking area for the purpose of an automotive mechanic shop. You'll have multiple vehicles there, so it didn't seem terribly practical to have landscaping throughout the interior of the site between the building and the road allowance. But between the easterly entrance to the south, you can see the location of the septic. That's a large grassed area. And then the area south and west of the building is grassed as well as the entrance at the north.
And you mentioned the septic. Don't we have a sewer line out there?
No. Mr. Chair, we do not at this particular location.
It doesn't go that far? No. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? So we're all clear. We've had moved and seconder for the staff recommendation. And we've had request for recorded vote at this time. Councillor Boomer?
Before we do that, then, I think I will speak. We don't often have the opportunity to have a dramatic impact on what we see when we come into the community, and so I can't help be supportive of staff in this one. And while I commend the fact that someone wants to build a business here and everything else, at the same time, we very seldomly get the opportunity to have an impact on what's built. And I think we're not absolutely denying this by saying, no, come back with something that looks better. But I think it doesn't have to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to have a significant improvement in the facade and how this building is put together. So while I respect what's been done and the direction that's been taken, I think that we can have a little bit more vision with what we can see on that corner, and so I'm supporting staff in this one, just because we have so few opportunities to fix things for the better, and holding ourselves to the standard of what's already there. I think we have the opportunity here to build something beautiful that sets a new standard for everything else that would be built on that corner afterwards, and holding people to that. Because if we go to a fairly low common denominator, the next one that comes through will use that as precedent, saying, well, why would we want to improve past what's there already? And we have a real opportunity to make this look better, and I think we should try to take that opportunity. And while I realize there is more cost involved, I think it's a worthwhile investment in our community. My comments. Thank you.
Councillor Chambers?
And I'm going to support the recommendation as presented for refusal. I'm looking at the staff report, and basically the recommendation is refusal until such time as the applicant submits improved building elevations. So if the application is refused, the next step is a consultation with the applicant to basically make improvements on what they're submitting, and it may not achieve the gold standard that we may want, but I think there's room for improvement and room for compromise. And in order to get the compromise, the recommendation or the site plan has to be refused and sent back for further modifications to hopefully reach the compromise that we're looking for.
Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, when you look at the picture there, not of the hydro, but of the surrounding buildings and the gas station across the street, I think that this building will look just fine on that corner. The grass, the red maples against the gray siding of this building will look quite nice and be a big improvement to what's there. It's not exactly the gateway. I would consider the gateway back where the Paris sign is. It's on a main corner, certainly, but it is a big improvement. And so I'm not supporting the staff recommendation.
Councillor Wheat.
Well, as far as the gateway is concerned, most of the traffic that's going to go by this building is leaving town, not coming in. Because that piece of property, that piece of roadway right in front of it is leaving town, not coming in. But if I think back a few months ago, we had a consultant here, education session, showed us different pictures and whatnot, what have happened in different communities. Oh, isn't that wonderful? That's what we need to be doing. That's what staff needs to do. Well, here's an opportunity, staff does it, to try and set a precedence, and I'm supporting the recommendation. I'm sorry, because it's not turning the applicant down. It's just trying to make it a little bit better. And we got to start somewhere. And in my opinion, this is where this is an opportunity to start.
Okay, a recorded vote is being requested. So voting on what is being moved and seconded, which is the one in front of you, which is for refusal. All in favor of the recommendation?
Sorry, what is the motion, to be clear on?
To refuse.
Okay, Adam's gonna.
That be refused, Mr. Mayor.
Pardon?
The motion is that the application be refused, the site plan.
That's what the vote is, that be refused.
Okay, thank you. All those opposed to the motion?
Motion is lost on a tie.
Lost by a tie. Now, the part that Councillor Chambers mentioned, about the refusal part, and I think Ryan had agreed there'll be a follow-up meetings, they'll try to reach a compromise and get us closer to a gold standard, if that's the right word.
It's just refused. It's just refused? It's a shame.
You said it was refused, was carried. Sorry, lost. So we're at a different position.
You're standing still right now.
Yeah. Okay, so Council Chambers can now,
I was just going to comment, Mr. Chairman, we are now in planning limbo. We have voted not to refuse, but that does not necessarily mean that we accept, and the next step is before us. So there has to be some sort of a resolution. We're deemed that we're not refusing it. Does that mean that we are approving it?
No, we have to make a motion to approve it.
So you need some
somebody
motion.
to make a motion. Councilor Gatwood?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it's been defeated that that it be refused on a tie vote. So when this comes to council, council will hopefully have 11 members present, and that could break the tie. That's my suggestion.
You can't do that.
So could we not make a
We're
new,
going to council. Done.
a new recommendation?
Yes.
Councilor Weed had a,
Well, yes, my opinion is, if I was in the chair, somebody's gonna have to make a separate motion.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Councilor Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, if I could, I'll make a motion that staff circle back with the proponents and work with them to bring something that we can have on that corner. It was stated by the applicant that was up there that they're willing to, they're willing to do some negotiation. So let's put it back and see what negotiations can be done and come back to us with something.
You can second
Okay,
that.
is there a seconder for Councilor Pierce's?
Yeah,
Okay, seconded by Mayor Addy. Discussion?
you need to.
Councilor Gatwood?
I don't think it's bad. Like
So the recommendation could be repeated what's here, and then it could just say that it be approved pending further negotiations with staff on the site plan.
No. No, that's.
I think the mover doesn't agree.
No, I don't. As I say, I'm not putting this back to say that they have to go back and decide something that staff is happy with. What I'm seeing from what we saw earlier, I would be happy with that. So what I'm looking is staff to get back with them to discuss this, to move this forward. If there is some sort of movement that they can make, as the delegation said there, that's fine. But what I'm saying now is that let's move this to the next stage to get something there. That's what my motion was for. It had nothing to do with what Councillor Gatwood was saying there.
In other words, committee will get a second look at this in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. It would have to. Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Councilor Boomen?
I'm confused, because the original recommendation to refuse would have done that. So now we're having another motion to have more negotiation, which is how we got here in the first place.
Discussion.
And yes, but to approve the recommendation to refuse would have automatically continued the discussion and had something else brought forward. So since we failed that vote, now we're going to have another motion so that there's more discussion, which is the exact same thing that you just voted against. And so I fail to see the sense of doing what you just voted against in a new motion. So I'm confused, because by refusing this application as it was, would have sent them back to have more discussion. We didn't want that, so we voted for that. So now we're going to have them do more discussion. So please explain how your motion resolves what you just voted against.
Councilor Pierce, if you may.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could respond to that, yes. My original vote against the original motion to refuse was the fact that, as I stated earlier, I understand where staff is coming from here, but I don't see an issue with the building that was there. So my vote on that original motion to not approve the refusal was for that reason.
So then
now, hear me out here, please, it's my floor. Now what I'd like to do is get this back in here so these folks can get this in front of, get something in front of staff, whether it's the same thing or something different, okay, is what I'm trying to get at here. From what I can see on this, I would be happy with what they're proposing here. It's a huge improvement to what is there. I would be happy with what they're proposing. That is why I voted against the first refusal. Now I'm just trying to get it back on board here, however we can. Obviously, it's going to take a motion to get them back in here for it to come back to us.
So then it would make more sense just to vote to approve their proposal. Because your motion still doesn't make sense. So all you have to do then, since if you're saying what you're saying, is just make your motion that we approve what they're proposing, as opposed to having more discussion. Because...
Go ahead.
Okay, Councilor Coleman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I totally agree with my cohort across the room here. The motion should say we accept the proposal that they got, or we've already voted on the refusal. So I would say the motion should be withdrawn and a new motion put forward that we accept the proposal that's put in front of us.
Okay.
Because, and I'm looking back at the recommendation here, it says nothing about negotiation. There is nothing in that. That word has been put in. And so if you want to put negotiation, you have to put it in your new recommendation. So I think the recommendation needs to be reworded, and then we can either approve it or turn it down or whatever.
Councilor Pearson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I can respond to that. The reason I didn't go that way is because the proponent stated that they were willing to negotiate. So what I'm looking for is for them to come back with something under the negotiate. That's what I'm looking for. We're looking for something at this level. Maybe they'll come back to us with something at this level because currently we're here. Don't know, but all I'm simply going is on by what the delegate said there, that they are willing to make some changes. So that's what I'm looking for, is them to come back to us with those changes. Because if we do it, okay, we're approving what's there, they don't have to do anything, it's what's there.
Exactly.
That's where I was going, sorry, that's where I was going on that, because the delegate said that they were willing to look at some changes. So at the end of the day, I won't pull my motion will stand.
Thank you.
What's the motion?
Okay, we have to vote on the motion, and we have a seconder.
Read it.
Can you read the motion?
Bring the question up, other than, we just check with the clerk that
Yeah.
we're doing it correctly.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and subject to Councillor Pierce, effectively that staff be directed to work with the applicants and the matter be referred back to Planning Advisory Committee.
So that wording's okay? Councilor Chambers?
Mr. Chairman, what that recommendation does is it takes the onus, let me step back. We have delegated the responsibility for site plan approval to staff. And with this particular application, by sending it back as it is, staff is in an awkward position because they're obligated to either approve or not approve, and they don't want to approve. So what this recommendation does, it takes the decision away from staff on approval or denial and puts it at Planning Committee to recommend to Council. So we're taking back the responsibility for this application and putting it at Council's approval rather than at staff level approval. And that's what's different, and that's hopefully in response to Councilor Bauma. So what this recommendation does is ask staff to negotiate with the applicant to bring forward a proposal to the committee for approval to recommend to council. That's changing the normal process, but in this case, it alleviates the situation that we've put staff in, and it shows a disagreement between committee and staff, and this is a resolution to that, if that makes sense. But that's what this recommendation does, so I support it.
Councilor Pierce, that covers your intent that you had in your motion?
Yep.
Okay. Any, Councilor Wheat?
I agree and disagree with fellow member committee, Mr. Chambers. Yes, goes back for staff to negotiate, but staff is now in a very weak position. This committee is going to make the decision. I don't know what basis staff is going to have to negotiate from, because it could be a weaker position, in my opinion. I'll support it to get this thing moving forward. But in my opinion, staff is now in a very weak position. Because the applicant knows that it's coming back here and not staff.
Councilor Boone?
I have to point out that the applicant pushed this forward because they were done negotiating and they need to get moving. It's now November, and we just pushed it off another cycle at least by doing this. So I cannot support the recommendation because what you just did was brought us back to what the original motion was to refuse, which is to delay and cause more negotiation this going forward, which does the applicant absolutely no favors and is going to push them into December. And I don't believe that's what they came here for, because that accomplishes nothing. So if you wish to help the applicant, then I would withdraw the motion and allow them to build what they want so they can get it done. But if you wish to not help the applicant, please vote in favor of the recommendation to have more discussion. It doesn't make sense because they're here to get this finished so they can get going, and we're just deferring it for a cycle with different words, which accomplishes nothing for them. And because they've already said, listen, this is what we want to build, and we've done what we can, this is what we can afford to do, and they're going to come back a month from now, another month later, with no shovels in the ground, and with the same drawing, because this is as far as they're willing to go.
Councilor Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could, in fact, Councilor Boma, that's not as far as they're going to go because he stated at the podium that they're willing to make changes. So my whole idea behind this was the fact that have staff go back to them, let them submit their changes, which is getting us closer to the bar that we want to set. It's got nothing to do with they've come this far, that's all they're doing. They stated, unless the gentleman at the podium, which I don't think he did, sold us a line there. He stated at the podium that they're willing to make some changes. Let's see what the changes are. That's all I'm simply saying. Yes, it does delay it, you're right, but I heard them say they were willing to work with staff, have them work with staff, bring it back to us.
Councilor Chambers?
Again, Councilor Boma, I understand what you're saying, but you miss the point that the authority to approve or not approve does not lie with this committee. It is vested with staff at this point. So if this goes back to staff, staff has indicated that they're not in the position to support the application. So we've delegated that to staff, and that's staff's authority, and they've, in essence, refused it, which doesn't do anybody any good. That's why I'm saying that we have to remove the authority from staff who believe that the application should be rejected and bring it to this table. And that's what this recommendation or resolution does, in my opinion. It brings it out of the staff's purview for approval or denial and puts it at this table. And I don't know how any other way to do that, because if we move on with the recommendation that is to refuse has been defeated, that basically turns it back to staff who are of mind to refuse it. So where does that put the application? That's why you have to move it away from the staff purview that we've delegated them. We've got to take that back, or they're going to refuse it.
Councillor Coward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And how we can do that, on the very first page of Mr. Cummins' report, he suggests that staff is requesting this application be bumped up for committee's consideration. And so if we bump this site plan up, it does come for council's approval. And so that all falls in line with what the motion is proposing, in my opinion.
Okay, we're going to call the vote then on, I guess it's a combination of Councillor Pierce and Councillor Chambers' motion, so you're okay on what it was?
Should have it read one more time.
Yeah. And should we add, be bumped up in that recommendation, Adam?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is the bump up process.
In a sense, okay.
Yeah. So in effect, that staff be directed to work with the applicants and refer the matter back to the Planning Advisory Committee.
Yep. All in favor? Opposed? Carried? Carried.
Split a different way.
Believe it or not, we still have more things to do on the agenda. So we're going to go to communications, which we don't have any, number 12. Other business, nobody's brought any forward. General manager's update.
Three things. I'll also be giving a couple of updates in camera on a couple of items. However, I wanted to give an update. You may have received notice of some hirings that happened recently for development services. Some formal announcements went out. The one person is Doug Lyons, who is coming to development engineering, and he's coming from Norfolk. And Jason Tomello, who is coming from Meritech. Doug is going to be starting on the 13th, and Jason will be starting, I believe, on the 27th, which are both Mondays. I just want to also give an update on building permit activity. Our activity has been consistent, really more of a cautionary note in anticipation of some registrations that could be happening in Paris in the near future. We're going to be expecting a bit of a flood of building permit activity. So staff are monitoring, are going to be monitoring it. It could be that we may have to bring in some additional staffing for either inspections or plan review. We don't know yet. We'll let you know if that is going to be necessary. But we're looking at it. We're expecting that we could get anywhere between 175 to 200 building permit applications for singles in the Paris area alone. So we'll keep an eye out on it and let you know. Also, there is a building permit in for a model home in Arlington Meadows, which is Rest Acres Road. They have applied for a permit. They are going through the process, and I'm not certain if it's up yet, but it'll be happening probably within the near future. You saw a information or a briefing memo that went out that we had another one that went in illegally. with no approvals. Arlington Meadows does have approval, and they're going through the proper process. And that's all I have at this point.
Councillor Simons?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mark. The new hires, will they be under the developments where you said, and I don't know if the term that I'm using is correct, but it was supposed to be, they were supposed to be
Development engineering.
paid through the developers and whatnot?
Yeah, through application fees. So
Yes.
that was approved in the last year's budget approval for 2017.
Yeah.
We were delayed in hiring them because we went through a department review and a process review. We are now going through the fee review, which was as a result of the review that was done by Performance Concepts.
Okay.
So there was a delay in doing that, so the initial budget that was allocated for it is, we're going to be well below that.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Questions of the general manager? Okay, seeing none, thank you. Number 15, there's Councillor Eddie.
We allowed questions?
Pardon me?
We allowed questions?
Yes.
There's a new street being punched out from Cobblestone out to King Edward Street. It's been in a state of
disrepair,
mud for
months, years.
Well, no, not years.
Months.
I don't think it's. I would say a couple months maybe. There's a new street being punched out from the same area to King Edward Street, and it's got some kind of a sign up. I don't know whether it's going to be a road for automobiles or whether it's strictly going to be commercial traffic. But I wondered what they are. We've heard about them before, that they were going to go, no date. And now it looks like it's going to happen. I'd like to know when it's going to happen. So when they will be paved roads that can be used by the traveling public. Because there's need for both of those roads in those subdivisions. They've been shortchanged and roads have not, adequate roads, in my opinion, of course, adequate roads, not inadequate roads to handle the traffic. And now it looks like there may be, and I was wondering whether the possibility of those before winter, or whether it's going to be a springtime.
Mark, do you have an answer?
I don't have an answer for you offhand. I can look into it. I think that most people would agree with your comment that it was, the area kind of was in desperate need of some sort of extension out to King Edward.
Well, that's the way I feel.
Well, I think that probably a lot of people would agree with you. So I know when we're looking at the next phases of registration, we're focusing on that road connection because of the traffic issues. What I can do is we can look into the timing of it and maybe provide a memo in a Friday file to council if that's acceptable to you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the speaker for the information.
Anyone else? Okay, we're down to the in-camera issue, potential litigation matter. So we'll have to clear the room.
They should have been put there a year ago, 2 years ago.
I agree.
It's discussed.
I agree. They were supposed to be. They were supposed to be.
That's what I understand.
Call
the vote.
Vote before they, you can vote to hold the camera before they.
Okay. I think Will already did that?
No.
Oh.
We have moved.
Councilor Coleman
And we have to have a
voted
vote.
to go in camera, seconded by Councilor Bowman. So we're in camera on.
Sorry.
All in favor?
Councilor Simons.
No, we're in, you have to ask if we're all in favor.
Have to.
Ask if we're all in favor of going in camera.
Oh, sorry. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
We're going in camera.